Welcome to Top 5, a show where we count things down from number 5 all the way to number 1. And this week on the show, by special request, Top 5 horror movies of the 1980s. Not one year of the 1980s, Matthew, but all of the 1980s.
Which, this was a Sophie's choice for me.
There was something about the 1980s. Not really for me, because I've told this story before. I got freaked out by horror movies when I was a very young child. I was like 2 or 3 years old, and I saw The Blob on TV, black and white, down at my dad was watching it on a Saturday afternoon or something. And as a 2 or 3 year old kid, you're seeing this thing, coming into a freezer or, attacking people, and people are screaming and freaking out. And that's enough to freak you out as a young kid. And then so I kind of avoided the scary stuff. I also had some other traumatic horror things that I'll tell another time. But and then, of course, I've told the story about when I was, I don't know, somewhere between 14 and 16, watching the Alien movie for the first time on television. And I was home alone, and the horses got out in the middle of a storm, and one of them pokes their head up by the window, and it looks like a giant, it's a black horse, so it looks like a giant xenomorph head. That freaked me out. And then I saw The Thing when I was home alone once when I was in high school, and that traumatized me. So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the horror genre up until I was probably about, I don't know, 25 or 30, somewhere in between there, when I was like, you know what, I'm just going to sit down, I'm going to watch these movies, and I'm going to embrace them. So I'm relatively late to the horror movie genre, but the 1980s certainly is an era of certainly some of the horror franchises, and there's some of the franchises that are on my list today. Certainly,
I think crazy creativity and
I think for the time,
sequel after sequel after sequel,
and I think for the time, also pushing the edge of what I consider gore porn.
Yeah,
with some of the stuff that happens, and so I think we owe our modern horror movies, whether that be The Void or whether that be Abigail or whether that be the Vavitch. I think we all owe them to the 1980s horror movies. And so let's start, Matthew, with your number 5.
It's funny that you mentioned gorn or gore porn because, and I feel like this may be a surprise to certain people listening. Hello, Mrs. Lopez, who loves to listen to the show. And I feel like if you are someone who knows me casually or through the show, I may be about to do one of those lists that you go, what the what? But
I mean, that's like every week, dude.
Oh, no. I do weird moments where I'm like, hey, did you hear about that? No, this is going to be something that I admit is out of character for adult Matthew. But 14-year-old Matthew, 12-year-old Matthew lived in a town, and down by the river was this creepy little store where you could go and rent VHS videotapes.
Yeah.
I don't even remember the name. It may not have had a name.
No, it's probably just a mom and pop, in the 80s, the video club, video stores popped up left and right. So I remember my little town had a video store that popped up for about a year and a half and then just disappeared in the middle of the night, along with everyone's souls.
Much like in my small hometown, the local bar didn't have a name. It was just the place that had a sign outside that said girls, 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 beer, girls. This place just said movies. And the movies that I watched when I was 14 and 15 are horrible. And my number 5 is probably at least the U.S. origin of horror porn. And I say U.S. because it's technically an Italian movie. I'm talking about Cannibal Holocaust, 1980. So the very beginning of the decade. Ruggero Deodato. If you have never seen Cannibal Holocaust, first off, adult Matthew says don't. Cannibal Holocaust is a horrible,
it is certainly up there
movie.
If you look at the list of some of the best horror movies of the 1980s, Cannibal Holocaust does show up there. I will say this. Scott Johnson and I were having a conversation this week, and he admitted he had never seen The Goonies, right? It has nothing to do with horror movies, but when we were whatever age we were when The Goonies came out, we thought that this was the greatest movie ever. It's got, exploration and action and scary bits and pirate treasure and friendship and all that stuff.
And Corey Feldman.
Yeah. And so as a kid, I'm like, oh, yeah, The Goonies is everything. That's a great movie. And then I grow up and I become an adult and I sit down with my kids to watch The Goonies and I'm like, oh, no, this is not appropriate at all.
No, it's
So
not. And
going back to Cannibal Holocaust, I think maybe the same thing is true, depending on your age range and where you sit, maybe in your parenthood or something. I think that may
that's
influence
definitely.
how you look at things like Cannibal Holocaust.
Cannibal Holocaust is an early example of the, that sort of Blair Witch found footage
Mm-hmm.
thing, which
Mm-hmm.
is great, but it is absolutely brutal. It is a bloody, horrifying, brutal film. There are things that happen in this film that still give me chills and nightmares just thinking about it. And at the point where we were, when you had sent the email, Stephen sends an email every week and says, "Hey, here's the thing." And contrary to popular belief, I do prepare for all of our major spoiler shows. I was going through my list and I'm like, I don't want to add this to the list, but I kind of have to because it is seminal in both the literal and the figurative sense. It is a terrible movie, but it is so influential. It is so important to other horror films. And I feel like the fact that it goes too far, just way, way, way too far, also kind of gives us maybe like not necessarily a guardrail, but sort of an upper level, an upper limit of, hey, this is terrible, this is horrible, this is a point where you don't have to try and go beyond this. You can now work within this level. You can try and make movies that are less disturbing and less horrifying. But I remember being 14 and being just haunted by the imagery and not necessarily the story, because the story is pretty rudimentary. I mean, film crew disappears in the Amazon. Turns out that they ran into a group of cannibals who lived in the Amazon, blah, blah, blah. It is a little racist. It is incredibly misogynistic. It is bloody. It is gruesome. It's not a good film, but in some ways, it's almost a great film. And people who like the real horror buckets of gore, the Herschel Gordon Lewis, the Rob Zombie's House of a Thousand Corpses movies, you wouldn't have any of that without Cannibal Holocaust. And again, I'm going to say this again. This is my caveat. Don't watch it.
All
Don't
right.
watch it.
There you go. My number 5 is a movie that has a really cool premise, and I'm almost positive David Desmalchian, David Desmalchian, the guy, Polka Dot Man.
Yeah, him.
I'm pretty sure that this was a huge inspiration on him when he was a young lad, like we were. I am talking about 1985's Fright Night, written and directed by Tom Holland, but not that Tom Holland.
Right.
This is a movie about a kid who moves into a new house, Charlie, and his
played by Herman's Head.
Yep, and he's a huge fan of horror movies and the horror genre. In fact, he loves watching one of those late night TV shows back in the 80s. You could watch late night television and you'd have these horror movies hosted by these crazy guys. And in this case, Charlie's a huge fan of the Peter Vincent Show, which is played by Roddy McDowall. And
Right.
Charlie is convinced that his next door neighbor is a vampire. And he does everything, number one, to prove that he's a vampire, and number two, to try to get Roddy McDowall to come and help him banish the vampire, because Peter Vincent in the movie is supposedly a famous vampire hunter. And of course, things go sideways very, very quickly. There is one uncomfortable kind of not quite rapey scene, but it is definitely somewhat non-consensual sex type stuff that's in the piece. But otherwise, it is a really good horror movie that I consider relatively tame by horror standards. Yes, there are some scary bits. There are people that blow apart whenever they get struck by light, but it's a good movie, and it was remade in 2011. But it's a really good flick, and it's something that I enjoy, and I enjoy sitting down and watching every once in a while, just because of this idea of maybe it's the height of the Cold War that this movie comes out, right? Where you don't know who your neighbor is. They're not communists. No, they're vampires. And what do you do when your next door neighbor is a communist or maybe a vampire? You call the local TV show celebrity and have him try to help you out. It's really good. I think it is relatively reflective of the mindset of suburbia in the 1980s as far as, dumb kids believing dumb kid things and also trying to be adults about it. And so that's why my number 5 is Fright Night.
Featuring a sexy turn by Amanda Burse, who would grow up to become Marcy, the snide neighbor.
Yeah, that's the part that's a little weird. That's the part that's a little weird and uncomfortable. Only because years later she comes out. She comes out, and so then when you go back and watch these things in hindsight, it's like, that's really weird. And so
it is weird.
Yeah. So, but it's still a really solid movie. Save for that one little attempted sex scene with her in it. It's a great movie.
Yeah, The Adventures of Herman's Head and Vincent is a lovely film. It was almost on my list, and the reason that I popped it from my list was I had a whole bunch of movies that were, in my mind, horror comedies.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, well, I'm not gonna do horror comedies. I'm gonna be pure. I'm gonna be pure, and which is why my number 4 does have some very subtle humor, but it's British humor, so it's not actually funny. It's more of that sort of thing, and that, of course, is Hellraiser. Clive Barker's Hellraiser, 1987. This movie, literally, I say sometimes things gave me nightmares. Everything on today's list literally gave me nightmares because I saw
I saw this movie today for the first time.
Today?
For the first time. Yeah, for the first time. I've never seen Hellraiser before because it is one of those movies that, again, I would classify as really leaning into gore porn. And,
absolutely.
And the first 10 minutes or whenever when Freddy is being all lacerated and blown apart and you got Pinhead and everybody showing up, I'm like, oh yeah, this is definitely gore porn territory. But then after that, it's a pretty tame movie where, yes, there are some, Pinhead and the other, whatever they are, space aliens.
Butterball and they are the Cenobites. They are demons / aliens / horrifying body horror archetypes.
Yeah. It certainly has some BDSM, sadomasochism undertones throughout the piece that I can understand why some people are very fascinated by this whole franchise. I had this conversation with Brad Will last night, and he was like, oh, skip Hellraiser 1, just go right to Hellraiser 2. It's a much better and scarier movie. But yeah, I watched Hellraiser for the first time, and it was not, again, adult me who has seen things like The Void and other stuff. This was relatively tame in comparison. But again, that's not 1987 and something that's scaring Matthew to death.
And that's, Brad is not wrong in a couple of ways, but the thing about it is psychological horror at that point, for me especially, was a new thing. It was something where to get in this film and have it just engender this sense of dread, this inexorable something beyond the pale that's going to come, and you're going to die. You're going to die because you failed to figure out this puzzle in time. First of all,
oh man, wait until this week's episode of Critical Hit.
Just like that is like one of my nightmares. Is that whole you failed to figure out the puzzle and now you die. But it is truly scary, and the performances are pretty remarkable. The main 2 girls, actually, if I recall correctly, are absolutely amazing. And of course, the whole thing with the man who plays Pinhead is he has this sort of Jean-Luc Picard gravitas. So you're kind of like Sir Patrick Stewart, except he's this spiky, horrifying thing from beyond the hoary netherworld, and it'll get you. This one, I say you do want to watch, but maybe not in the dark.
Yeah. I'm going to put in my number 4 position, Evil Dead 2. And again, I had a long conversation with somebody, Brad Will, last night, where he was like, no, you got to put Evil Dead on there. I'm like, Evil Dead 2 is just a remake of Evil Dead. He was adamant about, no, it's not. No, it's not. I'm like, yes, it is. And the reason why it is a remake is because Sam Raimi could never get the rights to the very first Evil Dead movie back from the studios. And so what he did was essentially get a better budget, bring back Bruce Campbell, and recast a bunch of other positions, but essentially made a remake and a sequel at the same time for Evil Dead 2. But if you watch the Evil Dead and then Evil Dead 2, it is the exact same movie, almost beat for beat, especially in how it ends. But it is so cabin in the woods type horror. That is certainly a genre in of itself, kind of like Cannibal Holocaust, where you go into a place that you're not supposed to go to, and then the demons possess you and take over and cause you to chop off your hand and attach a chainsaw, and then you go traveling back into the past. But there's something about Evil Dead 2 that I really like, because it does play with horror and it does play with slapstick a lot. And I think that kind of lessens the gruesomeness of some of the things that happen in the movie, like cutting off your hand and it's coming alive and fighting you. That would be terrifying.
Trying to punch you in the face.
Yeah, that would be terrifying in somebody else's hands, like a John Carpenter. It would be totally horrifying. But you put it in the hands of Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi, and suddenly it's like, okay, this is scary and gross, but it's also very, very funny. And so I need to put Evil Dead 2 as my number 4.
The thing that I love about Evil Dead 2 is that you can watch that movie and you can say to yourself, Sam Raimi is a fan of the Three Stooges.
Yeah.
And you can
that's
it
not
in every frame.
I don't think there's a single.
There's no question.
No question about that. Yeah. So what do you have for your number 4?
My number 3.
Your number 3. That's where we're at. Yeah.
Yeah. My number 3 is actually the film that introduced me to one of the greatest working actors of our time. And some people are about to laugh. I mean that absolutely sincerely. I meant it about Val Kilmer a couple of weeks ago, and I mean it about Jeff Goldblum in The Fly. 1986 Cronenberg. I was on the fence. I'm like, Cronenberg, do I do The Fly or do I do Videodrome? Do I do The Fly or do I do Videodrome? And the difference was I didn't want to remember Videodrome. So
I watched Videodrome 6 or 8 months ago, because I was like, I remember watching this as a young kid at some point and not really understanding it. And then I went back and watched it again. I'm like, okay, I see how it's kind of scary, but it's not like scary. So I would agree with your assessment that this is the one to put on the list other than Videodrome.
But like Videodrome, this is a movie that is gross in a very adult phase. It is a movie that I believe Sigmund Freud would place firmly in the genital phase of emotional development. And the movie starts out with the weirdest possible pairing that you can imagine. I want you to imagine like Gina Davis, and then I want you to imagine Jeff Goldblum. And then I want you to imagine the shining moment of this film is not the Fly animatronics, which are good, the body horror, which are great. The real shining moment is making Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis into this amazing, relatable, perfect like couple on screen. Turns him into a leading man, turns her into a classic ingenue. And I didn't think it would be possible. And in retrospect, I just look back and go, my God, that's amazing. But yeah, The Fly scared the bonkers out of me when I was a kid. Well, I guess I was 15, but even so,
that's a kid.
Scared the buck. See, is it though?
Yeah,
my child argued with me all day that they're 20.
Yeah.
They're practically grown up.
18,
and I'm like,
18 is legal adult. So yeah, if you're under 18, you're still a minor. If you're over 18, you're no longer a minor. And so, yes.
When I was 15, I had a driver's license. I had a job.
Yeah.
I had a girlfriend.
Yeah.
I had.
That doesn't make you an adult.
My own apartment.
That doesn't make you an adult.
I had my own apartment. I
doesn't
had,
make you an adult.
All of this stuff, but yeah. So The Fly is a remake of a movie from the 50s. And I would say that the magic of 80s horror is taking everything that worked in those 50s schlock films, those, Roger Cormans and those Ed Woods, and giving it just this weird, gross gravity, this human ickiness, something that my brain wants to refer to as just like gristle and snot, and taking all of that, oh no, and making it just utterly, utterly terrifying. And in a lot of ways, my adult dislike of body horror is not because body horror is too much for me or because I'm a sensitive soul. It's because there was so much of it in my childhood, and so much of it was really disturbingly good, like The Fly, like, The Videodrome, like my number five, that I look at the horror porn of today and I'm like, seen it. But yeah, if you've never seen The Fly, it's a really amazing turn by Goldblum. It presages Jurassic Park, everything in his career, really. Everything that Jeff Goldblum is, was, or ever will be, including Brad Bellflower, the guy from those commercials, is in this movie. And if you want to gross out anybody of a certain age, all you have to do is look them in the eyes and say, how does Brundlefly eat?
Yeah, you definitely find out
Yeah.
in that show.
Do not watch The Fly while eating spaghetti,
Oh
is what
no
I'm
no no
telling you.
no no no! There's definitely some shows you shouldn't watch while eating food, including
Yes.
my number three, Nightmare on Elm Street, 1984. This
Oh,
is one that I was surprised my parents rented, and we all watched it together as a family. Considering that the basic plot is kids who have sex are going to die, don't have sex. Maybe that's why my parents wanted to show it to me, because it's like, this is going to happen to you if you ever have sex with somebody. But the
I think it's
premise,
more likely that they didn't know what it was.
I think they knew it was a horror movie. I just didn't think that they thought that so much sexy times were going to be in it. This is Johnny
Yeah,
Depp in his debut as an actor,
yeah.
and he doesn't last long.
And as a soup,
Yeah, he ends up pretty much as a bloody mess, as do most of the kids in this movie. The plot of Nightmare on Elm Street, for those of you who don't remember, is that these teenagers who live on Elm Street are all targeted in their dreams when they go to sleep. This creepy guy called Freddy Krueger, who's got this burned up face and claws for hands, comes and kills the kids in their dreams. And if you fall asleep, Freddy Krueger's going to get you. We come to find out as the movie progresses that Freddy Krueger is getting revenge on the kids of the parents, or he's getting revenge by killing the kids of the parents who killed him, because he was a child murderer, a child killer. And so these parents rounded him up and burned him to death. And so now he is exacting revenge through the kids' dreams. And how long can you stay awake before Freddy Krueger comes to get you? There's a really good, Wes Craven does a really good job in kind of blurring that line of what is real and what is imaginary in this, where,
hmm
you're sitting in the classroom and then all of a sudden you hear some claws out in the hallway and you go and investigate, and suddenly there's Freddy Krueger in your school hallway, and then you realize you're having a dream. And maybe it's in Nightmare on Elm Street 2, the phone scene with the tongue. I can't remember if that was in the original or in
I,
another one.
I think that's in the original, but I think it gets referenced again in
Oh, okay.
three.
Yeah. So, she's talking on the phone and all of a sudden Freddy Krueger's tongue comes out and starts licking her, and it's like, gross and everything. This is definitely a gory movie in the way that people die. I mean, Johnny Depp's character gets sucked into the mattress, into a big hole, and then blood just sprays out all over the ceiling.
Right.
It
It's
is,
Johnny Depp borscht.
yeah, it
It's gross.
is. It is definitely a very gory movie, but it is also one that has spawned like 50 bajillion sequels. And I don't know. I think probably this first one is probably the best one.
Three is the best, but one is excellent. It is
Yeah.
excellent.
Yeah. So that is my number three, A Nightmare on Elm Street. All right. Before we get to our top two, I just want to remind you that if you enjoy this show, if you found some value in this, if you're getting some movies that you're going to watch this weekend with your significant other, so you can have those jump scares, or if you're a teenager and you're looking for something to do on a Friday night, then here's a list of things. And if you found value in this list of things, then we would ask you to give a little value back by heading over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/major spoilers, where for just a small contribution each month, you can keep this show going for the far future. You can keep us independent. We don't have to shut down. We don't have to let the big corporations win. You can stick it to the man by becoming a patron today for just a mere $5 a month.
Save the empire.
I mean, seriously, stick it to the man. Stick it to the big corporations that are out there sucking up all your podcasts, and say, hey, I believe in small independent podcasters like Major Spoilers and Top 5. $5 a month. $5 a month is all we're asking. Find out more. Patreon.com/major spoilers. Okay, we are now into our number twos. And Matthew, what do you have for your number two favorite horror movie of the 1980s?
So here's the thing about the 1980s. There were a lot of things that were almost my number two.
Yeah.
There were a lot of movies because I'm like, oh God, The Shining. I can't not say The Shining. I can't not say Phantasm 2. I can't not say Tetsuo the Iron Man. But I came down to the point where I realized that the one that holds up the most for me borders on comedic, but this is very important. When I went to see the Wikipedia page for Joel Schumacher's The Lost Boys, it does not say it's a comedy. It says it's a supernatural black comedy horror. And so I broke my comedy rule to put in The Lost Boys for a couple of reasons. A lot of the movies that I watched as a kid do not appeal to my child at all.
That's okay. They're a different person. They don't have to like the things that you like.
No, that's fine. But this is a movie that there are a lot of movies that we agree on, and this is one that we agreed on. This movie is fun, terrible, horrible, gross.
You're
fun.
eating maggots, Michael.
How are those worms, Michael? Yeah. And of course, the acting is just, I mean,
it's there.
It's
There's definitely
there,
people acting.
Yeah, Alex Winter is in this, which is
the Frog, the Frog Brothers are great.
Frog Brothers are funny. Did you know there's a sequel with the Frog Brothers?
Yes, and it was a Sci-Fi Channel original, if I remember correctly.
Where Edgar gets turned into a vampire and Alan comes back to follow.
I remember watching it, only like watching it kind of out of the corner of my eye or whatever kind of thing.
I watched that, and then I watched the third one, where Corey Haim comes back, and it may be Corey Haim's final film role. But here's the thing about it. When I think about this movie, I think about explosions and gore.
Yeah.
This gore is still, chunks of flying people, but I think it's slightly less graphic. But it ends with one of the greatest one-liners in movie history, because you have this guy who comes in, and by the way, I've always thought that was Art Carney.
I know, it does look like a lot like him, yeah.
It's Barnard Hughes, who is Art Carney's duplicate. But Barnard Hughes walks in, sighs, walks across his ruined house, gets a soda, turns to his family and says, "One thing I could never stomach about Santa Carla, all the damn vampires."
Yeah.
And they've all tried to keep the truth from Grandpa all movie. And then the fridge closes. And as the fridge closes, that's how the film fades to black. That's an ending. I had to have Lost Boys just because of that moment.
Yeah. One thing I can't stand is all the vampires in these podcasts. Because my number two is a movie that I saw in 1985 as a 15-year-old. And I was not allowed to go into an R-rated movie. And so I just so happened to be up in Colorado visiting family for a reunion of some type on my dad's side. And so I was like at the time, well, not my sister was younger, but I was the youngest of all the boy cousins. I was kind of the youngest of everybody there. And so that means that all of my cousins were, all over 18, 19, 20. Some of them were already in their 30s by 1985. And so my cousin that was the closest age to me, he was 19, just graduated high school, and it was the summer he was hanging out with all his friends, and they're like, "Hey, let's go to the movies. I guess we got to take Steven with us." And they're like, "We're going to go see this movie. It's R-rated. You're going to be able to get in with us because we're adults. But if anyone asks you, just tell them that you're 17. I'm like, "Okay, fine. What movie are we going to go see?" And we went in and we saw Life Force.
Oh, God.
Now, Life Force, if you don't know the premise, it's about space vampires coming to take over the Earth. One of the things that people always remember about Life Force is there is a beautiful woman who appears naked for most of this movie. Matilda May, I think, is who it is. And she's very beautiful. But then as she comes up to kiss you, she drains the life from you through lightning and special effects and different things. And your body shrivels up into a little husk.
Mushroom.
Yeah. I also think Patrick Stewart's in this one, if I'm not mistaken.
He is.
Yeah.
Yes.
And this may be the first time I ever saw Patrick Stewart. I think
probably.
So. Yeah.
Either this or Dune, if you saw the.
Oh, yeah. I would have seen the original Dune. So, yeah, I'd seen Patrick Stewart before. I don't remember when Star Trek started, but it was probably right around the same time. But yeah, this was a horrifying movie. And then, of course, it all goes to heck in the third act, and it's crazy, crazy, crazy scary. Great special effects. Toby Hooper is the director on this, and this movie goes places. And some would say it's a horrible movie, but I don't generally have scary dream movies or scary dreams based on movies that I have seen. I have scary dreams, but not usually based on the movies that I've seen. And for a week, I would wake up in the middle of the night thinking about Life Force because it was so frightening to me as a 15-year-old kid with the violence that was going on. Is it a good movie?
Oh, yeah.
No, it's not. Is it got some good scary jump scare stuff? Yeah, it does. So that's why it's on my list, just because of how scary it was for a 15-year-old me back in 1985. Probably at the time, though, it came out in the summer, so I would have been 14 technically. So
more than likely.
There you go.
I remember seeing this on a date at the drive-in.
Why would you take your date to this movie?
I didn't take my date to that movie. I took my date to the drive-in. This just happened to be one of the movies playing during my date at the drive-in. You had to be there. It was a very, very
No, I'm glad I wasn't.
The drive-in was the only place to go. It's fine. It was fine.
All right, we are up
later.
to our number one movie, our top 5 horror movies in the 1980s. This is our number one spot. And Matthew, what to do you have for your number one?
If I had not said no comedies, there's no way I could have not done Ghostbusters. And so that's part of the reason I said no comedies. In the strictest sense, there was a 3-way fight for number one. And it was an interesting fight because the 3 films in question all had the same original author or were adapted from the works of the original author. Mm-hmm. And I had to weigh, was the old creep scarier than a 57 Plymouth Fury? And was that scarier than the demon child with the scalpel? And I finally had to fall on the side of 1989 Pet Sematary, the first adaptation of the Pet Sematary movie. And there's 2 reasons why. One of them is Fred, and the other one is Gwyn. Because the movie Pet Sematary, if you've never heard the story, is about a city doctor who moves to the backwoods of, in the movie, I think they say it's Maine or Oregon or something.
It's Maine, I think.
It's definitely Maine in the story. And they move, and there's a nice old man next door, and that man's name is Judd. And Judd is a widower. And one day, the family cat gets run over by a truck. And there's this running theme throughout the thing of these oil trucks come screaming down from the refinery at high speed all day and night because they're on this remote road. And so that's how the cat gets run over. But knowing that the little girl loves the cat so much, the old man tells the city doctor, he's like, Lois, get your cat. And so they climb up to the old pet cemetery, and then they climb past the old pet cemetery. And long story short, too late. The next morning, the dead cat is wandering the grounds of the house again.
Dun, dun,
but it's not quite the same. To this very day, I will say 2 things about this movie delight me. Fred Gwynne, best known as Herman Munster, does completely immersive Maine accent throughout the whole film, to the point where I could still crack up my kid by leaning into their room or calling them up on the phone and going, nah, you don't want to go down that road. And they will just crack up and laugh and laugh and laugh. But as the film starts to come to a close, and I don't know if it is the child acting or if it's a voice actor acting for the child, but this little boy, this tiny little child, Miko Hughes is the actor's name, gets to do these wonderful moments where he's being all scary. He's like, hello, Daddy. Now I want to play with you. And it's so creepy. And it's almost camp. But then it comes back around because you laugh a little bit and you giggle, and then that child comes at you with a razor blade in his hands. And, no, just don't do it. Don't ever do it. Just run screaming. And I did find out, I watched it finally. I did find out that the remake of Pet Sematary, or the second adaptation, whatever you want to call it, in 2019, I think, 2020.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty okay, but it does two things that separate it from the first. It diverges from the plot of the story in a very, very clever way, which I love. And John Lithgow, whom you may know as John Big Booty, does not do the appropriate accent throughout the film. So if you want an absolute schooling in horror with some questionable acting, don't get me wrong, there are some terrible actors in this film. The main character is a block of wood, but it almost makes him scarier because one of the taglines of the film is that the soil of a man's heart is stonier, Stephen. Nobody knows what's in the heart of a man. So you have this doctor who's slowly losing his mind and getting more closed off, and the actor is acting more and more wooden and more disturbing. And it really works. Pet Cemetery, 1989. I went from the beginning of the 80s to the end of the 80s, and I've got like 57 also.
Yeah, I'm really surprised that The Shining wasn't on your list. I really thought it was going to be. I took The Shining off my list and replaced it with Fright Night. Just because,
it would be there.
Yeah, because I didn't want a lot of duplicates on this, but The Shining is usually regarded as the best horror movie of the 1980s. So I'm sure we're going to get a lot of flack for The Shining not being on anybody's list, but that's okay.
The Shining is not on my list because I thought for sure you'd have it, so I figured we were covered.
Yeah. Here's the thing. The Shining is a really, really good movie. But it's one of those that's a psychological horror. Yes, there is the hotel or whatever is haunted and the weird things that are happening, but those things happen so quickly, and there's so much space in between where it's just Jack Nicholson just slowly going crazy, and Olive Oyl slowly, going crazy as well. And so I didn't put it on my list, even though I agree it is a fantastic movie. Believe me, The Shining is a fantastic movie. But if you're talking about movies that scare me, these are the ones that scare me. Maybe with the exception of The Evil Dead 2, just because there's more comedy than horror, but it's got some gory stuff in it.
It's scary in a different way. And I think the thing about The Shining, it's not on my list solely because I thought it would be on yours. The thing about The Shining that I consider to be their greatest achievement, the little boy, not Jake Lloyd. Lloyd played Anakin. Danny Lloyd, little boy who played Danny, was in this horrifying movie. Kubrick was there. Kubrick is known for torturing his actors. Kubrick did a number on poor Olive Oyl in this film. That little boy was never scared for a second. That little boy did not know what this movie was about. They protected that child from every ounce of the horror of that film. And that, to me, is their crowning achievement. The fact that they managed to have an 8-year-old child on the set of a horror movie, and he was just having a good time and playing with his trike and running around and having adventures with his new actor friends and his family and the crew. And I'm just like, that right there may be worth the price of admission.
Yeah, a little known fact, or maybe it's a big known fact, depending on if you know him. A friend of the show, Brian Ibbott, was actually one of the finalists to play Danny in the movie.
No way. I did not know that.
Yeah.
Is that a story that he tells all the time that I should know?
He doesn't tell all the time, but if you've been around him long enough or listened to the morning stream, he talks about it occasionally. But yeah, that's kind of his thing. So anytime you bring up The Shining, he has a very big fondness for The Shining, only because, you got to meet the actors, directors, and everything. And he was one of the finalists for that role. So yeah, but The Shining, a very good movie, but not my number one horror movie of the 1980s. No, my number one horror movie of the 1980s is The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, which is about as close to the Mountains of Madness as you can get. But in it, Kurt Russell is part of a team of scientists down in Antarctica, and they discover something in the ice. Well, actually, the Swedes discover something in the ice, and they go and investigate. Whoever they are. They go and they find something in the ice as well, and they bring it back. And it turns out to be an alien that can inhabit anybody and become anybody. And throughout the movie, you are left wondering, who is the alien? Even as the credits close, you wonder, did the alien survive or did they kill it? We will never know. But if you haven't seen The Thing, it's great. The I think it was Cronenberg that did the special effects on this, right? Or who am I thinking of that did the special effects? I want to say Cronenberg. I could be wrong.
No,
But
it's what's his name with the face? God, ah, I'm losing my brain. Keep talking. I'll find it.
okay. So I dig this movie just because it deals with the crazy unknown that is out there. It's a horror movie, but it's also sci-fi horror. I find it more thrilling than Alien or Aliens, even though it is kind of the same thing where an alien's going to inhabit your body and kill you. But this one is done in such a great way, and it's got such a look. And it's considered a flop. I mean, it was not. It is not a movie that in its initial release people gave much thought to, but it's only
Hmm.
afterwards when people were like, holy crap, this is so good. And I remember
Yes.
watching it at a friend's house, my friend Mike's house, and we were just having a great time with it, just because of all the creature effects that go into this. It looks like it's Stan Winston who did the
Yes.
creature effects on this. But it's just such good stuff that if you haven't seen the thing, I would encourage you to watch it. Don't watch the prequel and don't watch the original film. Go and
Mm.
watch this version because this one is far superior than the 1960s version or the 1950 version of it. So go
Yep.
and watch The Thing by John Carpenter. John Carpenter tends to show up on my list a lot. I think I like him because he's one of those people that is one of those I don't give a crap kind of people,
Yeah.
and his movies never do well at the box office. I think mainly because he is doing the movies for himself, I think, a lot of the time, especially if you look at like Big
Yeah.
Trouble in Little China, Prince of Darkness, Mouth of Madness, that kind of stuff. Um, but this one is probably his most successful film. And that's why
Yeah.
it's my number
I mean,
one horror movie of the 1980s.
yeah. I think that the main thing that I believe that you and John Carpenter share, and I think the thing that draws you to this, and I mean this with respect, this is not a jerk thing, is a fundamental paranoia that other people are out to get you. And it's one of the greatest parts of every Carpenter movie, be it Christine, one of my faves, or
Yeah.
this, or the one where
Yeah.
Captain Kirk is going to kill you.
Yeah.
You know,
Halloween.
just
Yeah.
everybody's bad and everybody's going to come and get you, and that makes for some scary times.
Oh, yeah. When you don't, it's not I don't think it's paranoia. It is just that I think
The universe
everybody.
has unknown forces,
Yeah,
and
so
now
that's
they're
so
looking at you.
cosmic horror is this for the characters this realization that they are insignificant in the universe. I think our human brains like to think that we are big grandiose creatures, that we are the center of everything, that we are important, that's our ego, and that's everything that I think allows us to survive. But cosmic horror strips away your notions of importance and shows you things that are far greater than your mind can comprehend, thus shattering your ability to reconcile with your ego to the point where you realize that you're meaningless in the vast cosmic space of things.
Mhm.
And cosmic horror is just another name for Lovecraftian horror. But if you look at Lovecraft stuff, especially if you look at a lot of John Carpenter's stuff, it is very much that where people are. Here we have Kurt Russell, who's just having a grand time as whatever he does at the research station, and then by the end of the
Snake
movie,
Fish.
he is just realizing that he is nothing because there is this thing that no one can comprehend. All of these scientists can't comprehend it, and it is one by one taken them out. The only
Yep.
saving thing that he knows is that fire kills it, but in the end, he doesn't know if he's infected, and he doesn't know if Keith David is infected. And
Yep.
so that is how the movie ends with this big question mark of, did they kill it? Is it still alive? Is it still one of them? They're dying regardless. They are going to freeze to death in the Antarctic. And that little glimmer in their eye as the movie is ending, that they know that someone is going to come and find out why they have no communication with the American Research Center. They're going to find these bodies. They're going to take them back to their research center, and the whole thing is going to begin and again. And quite frankly, it could be the end of the entire world, depending on where this thing goes. And
Yep.
so,
The only asterisk of your statement of nobody knows who the thing is if you speak Norwegian, one of the opening lines of the film is a man yelling in Norwegian, one of the major plot points, but nobody understands him.
Well, no, it's
so.
Yeah.
He's literally saying what is one of those major twists that we get in that first act. And I love that. I love the fact that it's in there. And, the 14 people who see this who aren't, Norwegian in the United States are going to be like, hey. Which is why I think they dubbed that differently in Norway. I think in Norway, the guy is yelling in English.
Anyway, that is our list. That is our list of top 5 horror movies of the 1980s.
Lists.
And I want to know what you guys think. Are you disappointed that The Shining doesn't show up on our list? Are you disappointed that we didn't have The Fog on our list? Are you disappointed that we didn't have The Mist on our list?
The Mist is from 94.
The Mist is on my list. Because The Mist is on my list. Anyway, here's what you need to do. Head over to our Discord server. You can join the Major Spoilers Discord server for free. Jump into the Top 5 channel and share your top 5 horror movies of the 80s. What scared you to death? What traumatized you? What was the good time that you had with your friends? Was it The Gate? That was one that I should have put on here, too, because that was one that was pretty crazy.
I almost did Dead and Buried, which nobody remembers.
Yeah.
But, oh, my God, it'll scare you.
Yeah. Share them over there in the top 5 channel on our Discord server. Why? Because everybody loves a list.
This podcast is copyright 2024 by Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC.